My dad called me his Navy clerk for 20 years. Then his friend saw my tattoo and instantly saluted. I showed up to my dad's barbecue in my dress whites, straight from Washington. The ceremony ran long, and I didn't have time to change. Didn't want to, either. The grill hissed and popped. Smoke rose into the air. Men in cargo shorts and faded unit shirts stood around holding beers, talking about their backs like old war wounds. My dad spotted me first. "There she is," he called out. "My little office girl is home." His buddies laughed. Polite, safe, the kind of laughter that doesn't start fights. I walked across the lawn. The grass was dry under my shoes. Folding chairs dug into patches of crabgrass. Somewhere a neighbor mowed their lawn. My dad gave me a one-armed hug. His breath smelled like beer and grilled onions. "Look at you," he said. "All dressed up, big meeting?" Something like that. He didn't wait for more. He turned back to the group. "Guys, this is my daughter, Alex. She's Navy, handles all the paperwork and coordination stuff. Smart kid." A man in a stretched Recon Marines shirt shook my hand. Soft stomach, tired eyes. "Logistics, right?" he asked automatically. "Intelligence?" I corrected. "Special operations." He nodded like he didn't hear the difference. Another man stepped forward. Mid-30s, sharp posture, alert eyes. Someone who'd been in the field recently. "Commander Jacob Rains," he said. "U.S. Navy SEALs. Good to meet you, ma'am." "You too." My dad clapped Rains on the shoulder. "Jake just got back from a job overseas. Classified, of course, but let's just say the bad guys didn't love it." Everyone laughed again. We moved toward the grill. They talked about baseball scores, fishing trips, weather patterns, safe topics, easy topics. I stood on the edge of the circle, smiling when I had to, wondering how long I needed to stay before it counted as good manners. Rains was in the middle of a story about a broken propeller when his eyes dropped to my left forearm. The sleeve of my uniform ended just above the elbow. The tattoo showed a trident, the number 77. He stopped talking. The grill hissed louder. Someone's ice melted in their glass. A fly circled the potato salad. Rains looked from my arm to my face and back again, like he was checking coordinates. "Unit 77, he said quietly. "Correct." The yard didn't go silent, but it felt like the sound dimmed. My father lowered his beer without realizing he'd done it. "What's Unit 77? he asked. Rains didn't answer him. His eyes were still on me, studying my uniform, my rank, my tattoo, my age, seeing too much. Then his whole body shifted. He straightened, placed his hands at his sides. His chin dipped, his shoulders squared. Every part of him moved into respect. "Admiral Callahan," he said. "Ma'am, it's an honor." No one spoke. A neighbor's door slammed. A dog barked. The grill popped. My father blinked. "You're an admiral?" "Rear admiral," Rains said. "2 stars." I didn't add anything. Didn't need to. My father stared at me like I was a stranger. You said you did coordination," he said. "I do," I said. "And I lead." He didn't have a joke ready for that one. The barbecue fell apart slowly after that. Conversations dried up. Men checked their phones, made excuses. The recon guy shook my hand again with something apologetic in his eyes. "Didn't mean to assume," he muttered. "It's fine." Rains lingered by the driveway. Finally approached me as I headed toward my car. "Ma'am," he said softly, "there's something you should know." My stomach tightened. "What?" He glanced back at the house. My father was visible through the window, standing alone in the kitchen. "Your father. He's been telling people at the VFW that he's the reason you enlisted, that he pushed you into service, that your whole career exists because of him." The air felt thinner. "How long?" "Years," Rains said quietly. I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. Inside, my father sat at the kitchen table, smaller than he'd looked outside. "I didn't know," he said. "You never asked," I replied. He looked down, ashamed. "I thought you were," he started, then stopped. "You thought I was your clerk," I said. The truth landed hard. "I was wrong," he whispered. I leaned forward. "Commander Rains told me something interesting." My father's face went pale. "He said you've been taking credit for my career, telling people you made me what I am." His mouth opened, closed. No words came out. 20 years you called me a clerk," I said slowly. "And now you're telling strangers you built the admiral." His hands started shaking. I was just Alex. I stood up, walked to the door. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A text from my commanding officer. "Urgent. Recall to base. Immediate deployment. Eyes only." I looked back at my father. His face was still pale, still waiting for me to say something, waiting for forgiveness he hadn't earned. I opened my mouth to speak. "I need to back up. I need you to understand how we got here. My father wasn't always like this. Or maybe he was, and I just didn't see it clearly until I had enough distance to look back without flinching. I grew up in a house where my father's voice was the loudest thing in every room. He was Air Force retired lieutenant colonel, 23 years of service, the kind of man who believed discipline and structure could fix anything. My mother died when I was 9, breast cancer. After that, it was just me and him. He taught me how to fix a leaking faucet, how to change the oil in a car, how to stand up straight and look people in the eye when I spoke. He also taught me, without ever saying it out loud, that my value was tied to how useful I could be. When I told him I wanted to join the Navy, he laughed. "The Navy?" he said. "You sure you don't mean the Coast Guard? Or maybe just get a nice desk job somewhere?" I was 17. "I want to serve," I said. "Then serve," he replied. "But don't expect to be a hero. You're too small for that." Too small. I carried those words with me through officer candidate school, through my first posting, through every evaluation, every promotion, every mission that taught me I was anything but small. I rose through the ranks quietly. Intelligence work doesn't get you parades. Special operations don't get you headlines. You do the work, you sign the NDAs, and you go home knowing you made a difference that no one will ever know about. At 40, I was read into Unit 77, an elite joint task force that operates in the shadows. The kind of unit the Navy pretends doesn't exist. The kind where you don't talk about what you do, even to family, especially to family. At 41, I took command. At 43, I pinned my first star. At 44, my second. My father never asked about any of it. When I visited home twice a year, maybe 3 times if I could swing it, he introduced me the same way every time. "This is my daughter, Alex. She's in the Navy. Navy. Does coordination work. Logistics. Real smart kid. Smart kid. I was 46 years old. I'd signed orders that changed the course of international conflicts. I'd debriefed senators. I'd stood in the Situation Room and made recommendations that saved lives. And my father called me a clerk. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself he was proud in his own way. I told myself a lot of things. About 6 months before the barbecue, I started hearing things.
Lieutenant Commander Sarah Ordizone, of my former protégés, now stationed at Naval Air Station, Oceana called me out of the blue. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "I don't know if this is my place, but I was at a VFW event in Virginia Beach last week. Your father was there." I felt my stomach tighten. "Okay." "He was telling people he's the reason you're in the Navy, that he pushed you into service, that you wouldn't be where you are without his guidance." I didn't say anything. "Ma'am, he was taking credit for your career in front of active duty personnel, people who know who you are." I thanked her, hung up, told myself it was a one-time thing. Then Captain DeMarco called, then Lieutenant Yates, then a chaplain I'd worked with in Bahrain. Same story, different locations. My father was making the rounds. VFW halls, charity galas, Navy reunions, telling anyone who would listen that Rear Admiral Alexandra Callahan, the woman who commanded some of the most sensitive operations in modern naval history, was his creation, his project, his success story. I didn't confront him. I didn't know how. So when I showed up to that barbecue in my dress whites, I wasn't just tired from the ceremony. I was tired of being small in his eyes. And when Commander Rains recognized the Unit 77 tattoo when he snapped to attention and called me Admiral, I watched my father's face. I watched him realize for the first time that I wasn't what he'd been telling people I was. I wasn't his clerk. I wasn't his project. I was someone he didn't know at all. After the other men left, my father and I sat in his kitchen. The same kitchen where he'd taught me to make scrambled eggs, where we'd eaten dinner in silence for years after my mother died, where I'd told him I got into Annapolis and he'd said, "Well, at least you'll get an education." He sat across from me now, smaller than I'd ever seen him. "I didn't know you were an admiral," he said finally. "You never asked what I did," I replied. "You said it was classified." "It is. But there's a difference between classified operations and classified rank. You could have Googled me, Dad. My promotions are public record." He looked down at his hands. I thought you were embarrassed, that you didn't want to talk about it because it wasn't important." Embarrassed? I felt something hot and sharp rise in my chest. "You thought I was embarrassed about commanding a joint task force? About briefing the Joint Chiefs? About doing work that actually matters? I didn't know. You didn't want to know." Silence. Then I remembered what Rains had said. "Commander Rains told me you've been telling people you're the reason I joined, that you made my career happen." My father's face went pale. I was proud. I didn't know how else to what? I leaned forward. "To be part of something you spent 20 years dismissing?" His hands shook. "I never dismissed you. You called me a clerk, Dad, for 20 years, in front of your friends, in front of my colleagues. You made me smaller every single time you introduced me. I didn't mean, and now you're out there taking credit, telling people you built the Admiral?" He couldn't look at me. My phone buzzed again. The deployment text. I stood up. "I have to go. Alex, I don't have time for this right now." I walked to the door, stopped, turned back. "You want to be proud of me? Then be proud of who I actually am, not the version you made up to make yourself feel relevant." I left that night. Flew out of Norfolk Naval Station at 0400 the next morning. The mission was classified. The location was classified. Everything about it was need to know, and my father didn't need to know. But while I was gone, while I was doing the work I'd spent 2 decades training for, something happened back home. Commander Rains felt guilty. He told me later, in a phone call that came 3 weeks into my deployment, that he couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen at that barbecue, about my father's face when he realized who I was, about the way I'd left. So Rains did something I never asked him to do. He reached out to Captain Marcus Hale, the public affairs officer for Naval Special Warfare Command. "Sir," Rains said, "I think there's a story here about Rear Admiral Callahan, about what she's accomplished, and about the importance of recognizing the people who do the work no one sees." Captain Hale, 15 years in public affairs, former CNN military correspondent, was intrigued. He started digging. He found my service record, my commendations, my promotions, my deployments. He found that I'd been the youngest woman ever promoted to Rear Admiral in Naval Intelligence. He found that I'd led operations in 7 different countries. He found that I'd been personally commended by 2 sitting presidents. And then he found my father. Captain Hale reached out to my father for what he thought would be a heartwarming profile. The father behind the Admiral. How one man shaped his daughter's path to naval leadership. My father agreed immediately. The interview was scheduled for a local news segment. Small station, friendly reporter, softball questions. My father sat in his living room wearing his old Air Force dress shirt and talked for 45 minutes about how he'd guided my career, how he'd encouraged me to join, how he'd mentored me through the ranks, how proud he was of his Admiral. The reporter, Jennifer Kwan, 12 years at Wavy TV, Navy veteran herself, smiled and nodded. And then she asked a question my father wasn't ready for. "Mr. Callahan, I spoke with several of Admiral Callahan's former colleagues. They mentioned she hasn't been home much over the past 20 years. Can you tell me about the last time you two had a substantive conversation about her work?" My father hesitated. "Well, it's classified. She can't talk about most of it, of course. But what about her promotions? Her commendations? When did you learn she'd made Admiral?" Another pause. I knew she was doing well. "But when did you find out she was a Rear Admiral, specifically?" Silence. "Mr. Callahan, at a barbecue. A few weeks ago." Jennifer Kwan's expression didn't change. "A few weeks ago," she repeated. "So you didn't know your daughter was a 2-star Admiral until a few weeks ago? It's complicated. And yet you've been telling people at VFW events that you're the reason she joined the Navy, that you shaped her career, that she wouldn't be where she is without you." My father's face went red. I never said. "We have multiple sources, Mr. Callahan, active duty personnel who were present at these events. Would you like me to read their statements?" The
interview ended there. It never aired, but the damage was done. Word spread fast. The Navy community is small. The Special Operations community is smaller. Within 72 hours, everyone knew. The man who'd been taking credit for Rear Admiral Alexandra Callahan's career had just admitted, on camera, that he didn't even know what rank she held. The VFW posts where he'd spoken, they stopped inviting him. The Navy reunions where he'd held court, he was quietly removed from the guest lists. The men who'd stood in his backyard and listened to him call me his little office girl, they stopped returning his calls. Commander Rains called me while I was still deployed. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I need to tell you something." He explained what had happened. The interview, the fallout. I didn't say anything for a long time. "Did you ask for this?" I asked finally. "No, ma'am. Captain Hale acted independently, but I gave him the initial lead. I'm sorry if I overstepped. I thought about it. About my father sitting in that living room, trying to claim credit for a life he'd never bothered to understand. About all the years I'd spent trying to be enough. About how small he'd made me feel. You didn't overstep, Commander," I said. "You told the truth. That's all." I came home 6 weeks later. The mission was successful. The details are still classified, but I came home with another commendation and the knowledge that I'd done exactly what I was trained to do. My father was waiting for me. Not at the airport, not at my apartment, at the base. He'd driven 4 hours to Naval Station Norfolk and waited in the visitors center for 3 hours until I arrived. The security officer called me. "Ma'am, there's a Leonard Callahan here to see you. Says he's your father." I could have said no. I could have told them to send him away, but I didn't. I met him in the visitors lounge, a sterile room with plastic chairs and a coffee machine that hadn't worked in years. He looked older, thinner, like something inside him had collapsed. "Alex," he said when he saw me. I didn't sit down. "What do you want?" I needed to apologize." "For what, specifically?" He flinched. "For not seeing you, for making you small, for taking credit for something I had no part in building." I crossed my arms. "You embarrassed yourself, Dad?" "Not me. I know. You stood in front of people who know me, who've served with me, and you lied about who I am. Do you understand how that made me look?" "I do now." "Do you?" He looked up at me. "I spent 20 years calling you a clerk because I was scared, Alex. I was scared that if I looked too close, I'd see how much better you were than me, how much more you'd accomplished, how much you didn't need me." I felt something crack in my chest. "I never needed you to be proud of me for what I did," I said quietly. "I needed you to be proud of me for who I was." He nodded. "I know." We stood there in silence. Then my father reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote this," he said. "I don't know if it means anything, but I wanted you to have it." I took the paper, unfolded it. It was a letter. Handwritten, 2 pages. It started with an apology, a real one. Then it listed every promotion I'd earned, every commendation, every deployment, every detail he'd ignored for 20 years. He'd done the research. He'd Googled me, read my service record, talked to people who knew me. He'd finally looked. At the bottom of the second page, he'd written, "I called you my clerk because I didn't have the language to call you my hero. I'm sorry it took me this long to learn the words." I folded the letter back up, slipped it into my pocket. "This doesn't fix it," I said. "I know. It's going to take time. I know." I looked at him. For the first time in years, I really looked at him, and I saw a man who'd finally realized what he'd lost. "I have a briefing in 20 minutes, I said. "Of course." I turned to leave, then stopped. "Dad?" "Yeah? Next time you introduce me, use my rank." He smiled. Small. Sad. "Yes, ma'am." 3 months later, I was back in Washington. Another ceremony. Another commendation. This time, my father was there. Not at my invitation. I didn't ask him to come, but Commander Rains did. He called my father and told him when and where. Told him it would mean something if he showed up. So he did. He sat in the back row, wearing his old Air Force dress uniform, the one he hadn't worn in years. He didn't try to talk to anyone. Didn't try to take credit. Didn't try to insert himself into something that wasn't his. He just watched. And when the Vice Admiral pinned the 3rd star on my collar, when I became the youngest woman ever promoted to Vice Admiral in U.S. naval history, my father stood up with everyone else, and he saluted. Not because he had to, because he finally understood who I was. After the ceremony, he waited outside. "I'm proud of you, Alex," he said when I walked past. "I know," I replied, and for the first time in 20 years, I believed him. I walked into the Pentagon that afternoon with 3 stars on my collar and my father's letter still folded in my pocket. My aide met me at the door. "Admiral Callahan," she said. "They're ready for you." "Let them wait," I said. I stood there for a moment, looking at my reflection in the glass. Not a clerk, not small, not hidden. Then I walked into the next room and did the work I was meant to do.